Hey, 10 o'clock. Good to see you again. So good to see you. Hey, if you're new with us, my name's Jared. I'm one of the pastors on staff here, and we're just thrilled that you're here worshiping with us. Is it still raining out there? No. Drizzle. Mist. Well, good. Hey, in a couple of weeks, we're starting something new that I'm incredibly excited about. And in fact, it's really not new. It's something we've done for a long time, but we're repackaging it. Starting February 9th in our garden room, which is where our high school students currently are, at 11:30, we're going to be doing a deeper Bible study. We're calling it The Good Book. And it's going to be with Dr. Mark Strauss. If you've been hanging around here for a while, this is the artist formerly known as The Cove. And our hope with this is that we can just bring people who've never been to the Cove for years and years around here. A lot of you know this. We did a Bible study with Dr. Strauss that met at an off-site location at 10 o'clock. And so we're bringing it into the building and starting at 11:30. And it's going to run on 10-week cycles. The first cycle, we're really just going to be taking the Bible and looking at what the Bible is, how do you interact with the Bible, and if you've been, kind of wrestling through that, and you open the Bible and you think, what in the world? This is a great place to go. If you've been wanting to go deeper into studying the Scriptures, this is a great place to go. And many of you already know Dr. Strauss, and he is really one of the leading theologians in the world. I'm not even sure why he agreed to do this, okay? He is if you've heard him before, he's a human theological Pez dispenser. Just, want the word, and it's a powerful visual right there. I'm not quite sure that's on his website, but that's my description, starting February 9th at 11:30 in the garden room. Hey, speaking of the good book, we're going to begin a brand new series together today on the Book of Ecclesiastes called The Art of Living. And I've been eager to get this series started for a long time and been praying through, hoping for this moment. And I'm excited about what this book has for us. If you've ever read the Book of Ecclesiastes, one of the reasons I've been dying to do this series is because it's just different than any book of the Bible. Wouldn't you agree? It doesn't do what traditionally the Scriptures do. The other 65 books of the Bible, it's typically preaching. It's somebody talking, and they're giving answers to questions that all of humanity has faced. The book of Ecclesiastes, it's not like that at all. It's not preaching. We're going to see this in just a moment if you've never read it. It's really ranting is what it is. And he's not really giving answers in the book as much as he is asking questions. And there's a reason for that, and we're going to explore that over the next few weeks. This book was written by a guy. Anybody know who it was written by? Solomon, yes. This guy named Solomon. He also wrote another book, actually wrote 3 in the Old Testament. He wrote the book of Proverbs, and we studied the book of Proverbs together, I think it was about a year or so ago, in a series that we called, anybody remember the name of that series? What's the point? That's okay. You remember the name of the book, Proverbs, hopefully. The Art of Living was what we called it. And this series really is a sequel to The Art of Living and studying Ecclesiastes. And it's Solomon. He wrote this book. And Proverbs, when you read Proverbs, he really presents these nice, clean categories. There's the wise person, and this is how wise people live, words they say, how they spend money, how they treat people. And here's what fools do. And there's the two paths. And the foolish person sees danger, keeps going. This is how they treat other people. This is how they spend money. There's these nice, clean categories. Well, Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs when he was middle-aged as a king. And here in the book of Ecclesiastes, he's like a grumpy old man. I mean, he's at the end of his life, and whatever he said, and in fact, when you read Ecclesiastes, we're going to see this in a minute, he seems to dismiss everything that he said in Proverbs, like, all that, just forget that. And he's moved on. But what he's searching for, and this is really the heart of this series, he's searching for a wisdom beyond wisdom, in a way not just to be wise or to live life, but to actually find some sort of enjoyment or some eternal dimension to what all of this thing called life is about. And the reason for this is he's trying to get us to examine the meaning of life, which we don't do very often. And really the purpose of this, you can say it this way, if I were to say to you, hey, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, I want you to meet me behind the Ralphs in 4S. Well, that sounds like a drug deal. But what would you say to me if I said that to you today? What would you say? Yeah, why? Why? What's the purpose? And here's Solomon's point. In the same way that you probably examine what lands on your calendar in a Monday afternoon, and you're intentional about what gets on your calendar on a Monday, a Tuesday, and you wouldn't just show up for something and go, well, I don't even really know why. Here's his point. When it comes to the totality of our existence, from birth to death, very seldom do we examine and look at, it's what Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Very seldom do we examine the meaning of life, why we're here, what's the purpose to all this. And the way in which he's going about writing this book, he's trying to push us to really examine what we believe and what we hold to be the meaning of life. And so if you have a Bible, you can turn with me. Ecclesiastes is where we're going to be. Right there in the heart of the Old Testament is an old, wise Solomon. So are you ready to begin the art of enjoying together? I need more of you. Okay, now we're serious. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting in verse 1. Is where we are going to begin. And if you're new to church, hang with me for a few moments, okay? This gets sort of, well, to be honest, kind of depressing. And then he sort of comes out of it, and we're going to land on some hopeful themes today. This is what he says. The words of the teacher, or it might say preacher in your translation, son of David. This is Solomon, king in Jerusalem. Verse 2, this is how he begins his book. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Let's close in prayer. We just finished a 9-week study on anxiety, and now we're beginning this. If you're new with us, we are not well. What an odd way to begin a very odd book. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And I'm just going to read through so you get really context here for what Solomon is saying. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? So you go to work, you come home, you go to work, you come home. Meaningless, Solomon says. Verse 4, generations come and go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. Verse 7, all streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea doesn't ever seem satisfied. It never is full. To the places the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, Solomon says, more than one can say. In other words, we don't even have words to describe how wearisome and sort of a grind existence is. The eye never has enough of seeing. It can't be satisfied, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. So essentially, anything that we could cook up down here on planet Earth to go, wow, that's exciting. Tesla's coming out with a truck. AT&T's going to have 5G. He's like, who cares? Meaningless. There's nothing new. It'll come and go. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? He says, no. It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations. In other words, you probably don't remember your ancestors from 100 years ago. No one's going to remember you in 100 years. Do you need Prozac yet? Is sort of where this seems to be going. And even those yet to come. So yeah, people are going to be born. They'll be forgotten too. We will not be remembered by those who follow them. And then he goes into this. So you sort of hear that and you're like, well, maybe he's going to take a hopeful turn here in chapter 1. And he knows, because he wrote the book of Proverbs, well, maybe wisdom is what you should pursue and what you should do with your life. Maybe that's meaningful. And then he says, nah. And this is what he says, verse 1. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem. So apparently, ego, not a problem for Solomon. Before me, I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom. So in other words, everything I said to do in the book of Proverbs, did it, applied it, this was my conclusion. And also madness and folly, but I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. What's the point of being wise? He gets to the end of that, we'll come back to this, and he says, I'll be a fool for a little while. In other words, like Animal House, I'll just do that for a while. And we'll see where it leads. And he says this, for with much wisdom comes nobody's allowed to leave yet, okay? For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. I said to myself, come now, I will test with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself up with wine. So I know this sounds bizarre, but people in this day, when they got depressed, they would drink wine to cheer themselves up. Use your imagination. How we have evolved. Okay. I'm not even sure the series was a good idea. I tried cheering myself up with wine and embracing folly. So I just plunged in on foolishness, fully. I love this, verse 4 of chapter 2. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself, and I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. So he's like, I moved from Escondido to Ramona, still not happy. That just didn't work out for me, which I could have told you that. Oh, come on. Oh, you Poway people got a little ego stroke right there. This thing's going off the rails. Oh, what is the point? I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired, I don't even know how this works, male and female singers, and a harem as well. So he has wives upon wives, 900 plus if you read through the rest of the story. The delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in... This whole thing reads like a rap song, didn't it? So this is his conclusion. I get more and better, more vineyards, more animals, anything I could get. I became greater than anyone in Jerusalem, not just currently, but formerly. Okay, verse 17, this is my conclusion. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. So apparently he has some trust issues with his kids. And who knows whether that person, his kids, will be wise or foolish. Man, this hits, this hits like a little too close to home. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. So what he's essentially doing, he's taking every stock answer you would give for what life is all about. We'll have pleasure. What's the point? We'll make money so you can pass it down to the next generation. What's the point? He's just throwing it to the ground one by one. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. And then he says this, if you jump to the end of chapter 2, and most scholars will tell you this is the turning point of the story. We'll come back to this. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is what? From the hand of God. For without him, here's the key, without him who can eat or find enjoyment. Finally, a ray of light. For without him who can eat or find enjoyment. Now, what in the world is this book doing in the scriptures? Let's take some chunks of this and kind of break it down one by one. First, you have this phrase that appears all throughout the teacher's rant, where he says, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. Sometimes this phrase appears as under the heavens, but it's a theme from the beginning of Ecclesiastes all the way to the very end. Under the sun is a phrase where when he uses that, he's describing the created world. Anything you can taste, see, smell, touch, feel, what scientists would say you can see with a microscope or a telescope. Anything that as human beings we create, we imagine, we design, it's all life under the sun. And he's looking around the world under the sun, and he essentially says, meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. This is the top phrase that he uses again and again, 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. He describes something, he sees something, well, that's just meaningless. Anything you could cook up to say, well, that's what life is about. Meaningless, meaningless, meaningless 38 times. Now, this word meaningless in the Hebrew language is this word havel. It's kind of a little bit of a V on that B, havel. In fact, let's just say that word together on the count of three. Havel, 1, 2, 3. Havel. And the word havel, it gets translated meaningless, and that's a pretty good, some translations would have it as vanity. The concept of havel is this idea that something is fleeting. It's sand between your fingers. A lot of the dictionaries on this word would say it means vapor, mist, something you can't, like you get it, but you can't quite hold on to it. So this is essentially what Solomon is doing. He's going around and he's talking about everything you can see under the sun, and he's saying, that's all it is. You get a little of it and it just fades. Oh, everything is havel. Life itself, the scriptures really have this theme, New and Old Testament. Life is but a vapor, a mist. You're here, you're gone. It's this concept, it's all just fleeting and fading. How many of us, maybe you have little kids and you're wrangling them in a store, and someone who's older, who's already raised kids, will come up to you and say, enjoy this moment. It's all just what? You're like, oh, thank you. Let me wipe the puke off my shirt to sort of take this in. And Solomon would actually say, it's not just those moments of life, all of life. It's all fleeting. It's all, you can't, and this is his struggle. How do you enjoy anything when nothing lasts? It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you build. The Soviet Union comes and goes. It doesn't matter what it is. You get a new car. You go to a new bar. You buy a new guitar. I don't care what. It's all. This is for you, DJ. It's all fleeting. It's all mist. It's all going to fade. You probably remember that moment when you were a kid and Christmas morning would come. And there was that anticipation, that buildup, that excitement. I can't believe it's going to come. And then what happens Christmas night? Everyone is sitting around in sort of a depressed stupor. And then as a kid, you would wake up on the 26th and you're like, how do I get that? 365 more days until we experience that again? That was, that feeling. You have the same feeling as an adult, maybe when you buy something. It just, I bought the 2024 edition, but it's going to eventually, there's going to be a new one that comes. It's all mist, it's all fleeting. You save and save to go on that vacation to Hawaii. You finally go, and it's the 6th day or the 7th day of the trip, and the end is coming, and you're trying to get your mind to stick with it, and you're on the plane ride on the way home. I can't seem, and this is the struggle. How do you enjoy anything when nothing under the sun lasts? It's all mist, it's all fleeting, it's all just havel. Several years ago, the current quarterback of the New England Patriots Thomas Brady, who's around 57 years old now, I think. Oh, come on. What's a Sunday morning without a Ramona and a Tom Brady joke together? Was interviewed. He was around 26 years old or so, and he was on CBS. He just won his third Super Bowl. Obviously, now he's on to 6, or he's won 6. Not this year. Ha, ha, ha. I thought I'd get at least one amen on that. It doesn't really matter. We're Chargers fans, so that's a whole other... Anyway... There they go to 1961 to 2016, Dean Spanos takes it. Anyway, drags them to L.A. Anyway, so we're just reading the scriptures today. That's what we're doing, little Bible study. Tom Brady is interviewed. And they said to him, what's next? I think it was Charlie Rose or somebody was asking him, what's next for you? Like, you're 26, you've won 3 Super Bowls. Where do you go from here? And this was his response. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. Dumbfounded, the interviewer stares at him and says, well, what's the answer? I wish I knew. I wish I knew. Tom Brady. So there you go. That was a hopeful cheer that Tom Brady will come to San Diego and start a football and quarterback into his 70s. You go to any schoolyard in America, you will see kids wearing Tom Brady jerseys. Why? Because that's the pinnacle. That's the goal of life. If I could get a supermodel as a wife, if I could get millions of dollars, if I could win 6 Super Bowls, if I could be considered the greatest of all time, climb that ladder. And apparently, Tom Brady is at the top of the ladder, peering over, and he's going, it's not quite what you think it's going to be. Even this, you get 1 Super Bowl, I guess I'll get 2. You get 3, I guess I'll go get 4. Who cares? So as Christians, we hear this and we go, well, maybe the answer is you're supposed to be wise. You're supposed to care about other people. You're supposed to make the world a better place. You can pass it on to your kids and, live your life with character no matter what. That's the purpose of life. But what does Solomon say? He takes every stock answer you could give and he's like, no, that doesn't work for me. Verse 16. Notice his language here. He says, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom. It didn't really quite work. So I went in the direction of what? Madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. And then in verse 18, for with much wisdom, it's just much sorrow. So any stock answer you'd give to say, well, that surely is the meaning of life. That's what life is all about. And he says, I did both paths, the path of the wise, the path of the fool. I pursued wisdom. I pursued folly. It was like I doubled down and I lived like Billy Graham for a while, and I didn't really see the point. So I made a U-turn and I went like full Billy Bob Thornton for a little while. Just went for it, just full on indulge whatever I wanted to do. And I'm telling you, I got to the end of both roads. What is it all about? He's looking for a wisdom beyond wisdom, a wisdom beyond the categories. And he's searching here. It's that struggle that you've had at some moment in your life. Maybe you grew up in a Christian home. You honored God with your body. You did what you were supposed to do with your money. You treated people kindly. You always took the high road. You've always done what you were supposed to do. And yet it seems like, or you have stories where you did the right thing, and there was not an equitable response from God. It didn't work out. You still got hosed. It didn't work out the way that you wanted it to work out. And you go, what was the point of that? I treated him kindly, and yet it still backfired and blew up in my face. Or on the other side of the coin, this is his other struggle. We all know people who, when it comes to their body, when it comes to how they treat people, when it comes to God himself, they have just turned and done whatever the heck they wanted to do with their life, and yet you watch them, and they seem to defy all the categories of conventional wisdom, and they would even say, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done some of that, but to be honest with you, it all sort of worked out, and you look at them and you go, how in the world does God honor the fool? How in the world does everything still work out when they rejected the path of the wise? And that's the struggle Solomon has. Is there a wisdom beyond the wisdom? Is there categories beyond the categories that I gave you in the book of Proverbs? In our culture, he's every stock answer. He's throwing it to the ground. In our culture, most people would say, well, I'll tell you the meaning of life, what life is all about. There's a few different ones that you could explore. In our society, most people would say, well, you should be a humanist. You should find a cause, care about other human beings. It could be anything. You decide what it is. It could be the environment, care about the environment, leave the world to be a better place. And I'm not knocking any of these. These are all great responses of what to do with your life. You should recycle. That's what you should do. You should, find a social cause that you believe in. Give your life to it. There's people that don't have clean drinking water. That's what you should. And Solomon, he's like, recycle, sure, go ahead. What's the point? We're all going to die. They're going to, sure. Do you get how deep the visceral sort of, what's the meaning to any of this? He's going down this road. On the other side of the coin, people in our culture would say, well, yeah, you should be a humanist. You should be a good person. But really, at the end of the day, you should be a hedonist. Pursue pleasure. That's what that idea means. You should, it's the philosophy of eat, drink, be merry. Life is short. You should be a person who takes good vacations, drinks good wine, enjoys yourself, eat good food to the best of your ability. That's the meaning of life. And Solomon would say, sure, do that. But what's the point if, under the sun, it's all, get as much of it as you want. You can't quite get the new car. Sure, who cares? Eat, drink, what's the point? In fact, most people you meet, this is certainly true in Southern California or places like New York, most people are humanistic hedonists, aren't they? I want to be a good person. I want to do things that honor future generations, but at the same time, at the end of the day, we should really just enjoy ourselves. That's what life is about. And he's taking every stock answer that you, me, our society would give that says this is the purpose of life, this is the meaning of life, and he's throwing it to the ground with his questions and with his rant. He's pressing me to examine what is all of this thing called life really about at the end of the day. And he's asking questions that you're scared to ask in church, if you're honest. And he's wrestling with things that you're scared to wrestle with in front of other people. Okay, well, that's enough ranting. We have to turn towards some hope. You've got to go to work tomorrow. Okay, so here's sort of the silver lining. Here's the breakthrough of the book, verse 24 of Ecclesiastes chapter 2. He says this, a person can do nothing better than to eat and to drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from where? From, let's read it together, the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? Who can enjoy anything unless you recognize the source of it all? So you could read it this way. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find anything enjoyable under the sun? For Solomon, when he uses the phrase under the sun, he's talking about the created order. He's talking about the created world. That way you can taste, see, smell, touch, feel. When he uses the phrase the hand of God, and this is an idea that repeats in the story, in the book, He's talking about the things, what you cannot see. He's talking about the uncreated order. He's talking about the uncreated God. He's talking about the God beyond the sun. He's exploring what does God say to Moses when he meets Moses. He says, I am, I am. Moses says, I am who? He says, well, I am, I am. In other words, I don't have a beginning. I don't have an ending. I'm not bound up in the space-time continuum. I am not under the sun. I am the uncreated God who holds all things together. So Solomon's sort of thesis is this, for without the uncreated God, who can eat or find enjoyment in this created world? You have to begin to open yourself up to that which is beyond the mist, or else, at the end of the day, if you really examine your life, there's just sort of a latent sadness that has to hang there because it's all fleeting and it's all mist. In the book of Proverbs, you have two paths. You have the path of the fool and the path of the wise. The path of the fool, you just do what you want. You see danger, you keep going. The path of the wise is somebody who takes care, concern for their life, and there's an art to living. It's called wisdom. This is the wisdom on the other side of wisdom. And at the end of it all, wisdom, foolishness, pursuing joy, planting vineyards, whatever you do, the pursuits of life, he's essentially saying there are really two paths here. You could say it this way. There is the created world, that which is under the sun. And there is also the uncreated world, this uncreated God. And if you just live your life for the created world, if you're just here in this world trying to pursue what you can taste, see, smell, touch, feel, well, it's all fleeting, it's all fading, it's all vapor, it's all mist, and all you can really do with your life is try to capture more of it and then be depressed when it's gone. Whatever you decide to do with your life. But if you open yourself up to see life as a gift from the uncreated God, and everything that you experience under the sun is some kind of echo, some kind of reverb, some kind of pointing, some kind of angling you to see it's a gift from the hand of God. And there's an eternal dimension to everything that you experience under the sun. Well, now you can actually start to enjoy the things of life. And you can see this whole thing called life is a gift. It's not just mist. And when you do that, you can actually open yourself up to enjoy whatever God has given you in this world to enjoy. There's two paths, the created and the uncreated. And he's saying there is no middle ground. If this world is all there is, if all there is the created world, all there is what you can taste, see, smell, touch, feel, you're born into the world, you die, you raise kids, whatever happens in this life, you plant vineyards, you get cars, whatever it is. If this is all there is, then nothing really means anything. Or the other option, if there is an uncreated God who has allowed you existence and is allowing you to take your next breath, then all of a sudden it changes everything. Because in this reality, if all of this is a gift, he's inviting you to step through the wardrobe to see all of this is a gift. And if that's true, then everything that you experience in this life means something. It has some eternal strand. There's some strand of glory in every experience you have in this life. And there is no middle ground. He's pressing you to see that. If there is no God, then nothing means anything. But if there is a God and you open yourself up to him in this existence, now all of a sudden, raising kids, planting vineyards, buying a car, whatever it is, what you do with your money, how you treat people, it all matters. Everything matters. And there's no middle ground. Either nothing matters or everything matters. If he was writing this in our culture, in our society, most people in our society would say, well, you know what, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not. Who can really know? That's the default position of culture. And, at the end of the day, you should probably enjoy your life and be a good person, and that's really what life is about. Solomon, no, that doesn't make sense. That's not coherent. You can't say, you know what, the origins of life, who really knows how we all got here, but we certainly know our destiny, we're all headed for annihilation. Oh, but by the way, while you're here, you should care about equal rights. No, don't give me that answer. Either everything matters and how you treat people and what you do, or nothing matters at all. There is no middle ground. And you have to lock in on the meaning of life as a gift from the hand of God. That is how you can begin to enjoy anything at all. Why did I take this breath? Why did I go on that vacation? Why am I allowed to go to work and do this work? Why is anything happening at all? Because it's a gift from the hand of God. The uncreated God has allowed me to experience this life in the created world. Well, now everything all of a sudden that you experience has eternal implications, and it all matters. In the first century, it's very difficult to read the book of Ecclesiastes by itself, and this is really the brilliance of the Bible as a whole. You need these 65 other books, usually with any book, to help you make sense or to understand what's going on in the book that you're actually reading. That's certainly true in the book of Ecclesiastes. He's struggling. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life? Well, this question, what was the meaning of life? John gives you an answer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, in the Gospel of John. When Jesus comes into the world, it really unlocks the question of the ages that Socrates, that Solomon, all the great philosophers and Stoics wrestled with. What's the meaning of life? In the first century world, it was very common for the Greek philosophers to get together and they would debate what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of life? And different schools of thought had different answers. The meaning of life in the Greek mind, they called this the logos. What's the logos? What's the purpose to all this? What's the reason? What's the truth that a person brings to us that if we live and abide by that truth, we've discovered happiness, joy, the meaning of life, what it's all about? And there was lots of answers. You had Confucius. Confucius said, well, I'll tell you the meaning of life. It's to obey your parents. That's what you're supposed to do with your life. Honor the generations. Other scholars would say, well, no, that wasn't what it was about. Socrates had a different answer. Plato has an answer. Everyone cooks up a different answer. And by the time Jesus shows up into the world, philosophy the Stoics, they had given up on there being a logos or any real meaning for life. And then John comes along, and he drops the bombshell. And he says this, John chapter 1, this is how he begins telling the story of Jesus arriving into the world. He says this, John chapter 1, starting in verse 1, in the beginning was the Word. And this word, typically we go, well, that's Jesus, and that is true. But the word that John uses in the Greek when he writes this down, in the beginning was the Logos. And the Logos was the Word. Or in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. Here's another way to read that. John tells you, I'll tell you what the meaning of life is. In the beginning was the meaning of life, Jesus. And the meaning of life was with God, and the meaning of life, the Logos, was God. And John was dropping the bombshell to answer Socrates and Solomon before him. I'll tell you what it's all about. It's not a truth or a possession that you're going to find. All of society, human history, had waited for a person to come to bring a truth that would revolutionize happiness for the generations, would bring peace to the world. And John says, it's not a person who's going to bring a truth that's the Logos. It is a person. It is Jesus Christ. That's the meaning of life. And you bring your life to him and you worship him. And he's been there from the very outset. He will be there at the very end of time. He's uncreated. And in the created world, you can have a relationship with this uncreated God and merge your heart with him, know him, cling to him. And you will discover now the essence of everything, the meaning of life, the purpose behind it all. And all of a sudden, when you do that, when you come to Jesus, the Logos, when you come to Jesus, you can enjoy life because now there's an eternal aspect to everything. When you stepped into a relationship with Jesus Christ, we use a lot of esoteric metaphors to describe it. Well, you went from death to life. That's true. You went from hell to heaven. That's true. You went from whatever metaphor you want to pick for it. What John is describing here is when you stepped into the presence of Jesus, you went from futility to utility. You went from nothing mattered at all to now all of a sudden every relationship, every conversation, your kids that you're raising, the vacation that you took, now all of a sudden everything matters because everything's eternal. Any experience you have in the created world, it has an eternal dimension to it because of Jesus Christ and your relationship with him. And John's opening you up to see this. What Solomon is wrestling with in Ecclesiastes, he's the meaning of life. Now all of a sudden, you see winter end and you see springtime come. That's not just a season. That is telling you something about ultimate reality and about the character of who our God is. Anything that you experience in life, if you're raising kids, maybe you just had a baby, and there's a lot of ways to look at that. One perspective Solomon has, if it's just under the sun and you have a kid and it's waking you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and the baby's crying and can't sleep and is, colicky or throwing up, well, there's one way to look at it. And Solomon says, here's one way to look at it. Either you are just a bundle of molecules who by chance fell in love with another bundle of molecules and you produced this little puking bundle of molecules. And what does it really matter? You're going to die. It's going to die. Seasons come and go. It all changes. What does it really matter what you do with this kid? It all fades away anyway under the sun. It's all mist. Or it's all utility. And you go in the room at 3 o'clock in the morning and you wipe the throw up off of you and off your child and you hold him. In the New Testament, if Jesus Christ, if it's really true that God, the uncreated God, wants a relationship with you, now all of a sudden there's an eternal dimension to that moment. And 5 billion years from now, that moment of interacting with your sick child has eternal implications. What you do in those moments, it matters. There's an eternal, and you can actually enjoy the relationship with the child because you know it's not going to fade. It's eternal. To enjoy anything, you have to find the strand of glory that's in everything, the eternal dimension to everything. Any aspect of life. If you go to a small group on a Wednesday night, there's one way to look at it. Well, what's the point of this? I'm going to encourage them. They're going to encourage me. We'll probably get transferred out of here at some point anyway, move to Omaha. Who knows where life is going to go? What's the point to any of this? That's one way to look at it. Or 5 billion years from now, you're going to be sitting around the throne of glory in heaven talking about those conversations and the way in which you encourage each other in this life, in this world. And it mattered. And it mattered. There's an eternal dimension to anything. You drive to work tomorrow. There's one way to look at that. Who knows what the office on the East Coast did? It's probably going to be a nightmare when we walk in this morning, and it's chaos because they always mess it up. And I'll get a paycheck and go home so I can take a few weeks vacate. That's one way to look at it. Or I'm made in the image of a God who brings order into chaos. And I'm going to show up at work tomorrow and I'm going to bring some order into the chaos that's around me because I'm reflecting the nature of the invisible, eternal God. And I can actually enjoy this work and this labor because 5 billion years from now, it actually still matters. There's 2 paths you can take, but there is no middle ground. Either everything matters because Jesus Christ, the Logos, came into the world, or nothing matters at all, and it's just vapor and mist, and all you can try to do to be happy is catch a little more of it. Solomon says, not so with you. To find joy, to find pleasure, to find any satisfaction at all, to find purpose, to find meaning, and this is what we're going to wrestle with over the next few weeks, you have to find the strand of glory in everything, that which will not fade away. And this life this thing called life is a gift from this eternal God. Let's pray together. God, we thank you. We thank you. It's not all mist. It's not all vapor. And you take us deep into the depths of despair in Ecclesiastes so we could come up for air and we could breathe and we could see what Solomon saw at the end of his life. It's all eternal. It all matters. You are the uncreated God, but you are the giver of life here in this created world, and it's all pointing toward you. There's a reason for all of it. And would we find it? Would we search for it this week? Would we struggle for it in those moments where maybe we're cleaning throw up off of us? Maybe we're having an argument with our boss. Maybe we're in a situation where we're not quite sure how to respond to someone who did something to us. Would we see the eternal dimension to our relationships, every aspect of life, how we raise our kids? Would we be the kind of community that searches to see the eternal in everything and enjoy this life because it's a gift from the hand of God and it's made to be enjoyed? It's in Jesus' name that we pray, and all of God's children said, Amen.